Hello class, this is your lecture on the biomes of the world, which are distinctive communities of life. Let's get started. Your outline is as follows. We're going to examine the major biomes of North America, including tundra, taiga, temperate deciduous forest, grassland, desert, mountain and coastal forest, and tropical rainforest. And while all of these are found in North America, many of them are also found elsewhere in the world. But to simplify things, we're going to focus primarily on North America. So first off, what is a biome? A biome is defined as an ecosystem with a distinctive community of life. And the biosphere of our planet has many different biomes. Temperature and moisture are the main factors that determine the dominant plants in each location around the globe. The vegetation that grows in these places, which is to say the plants, is key because this vegetation influences which other organisms can live in each area. Also, the plants are the primary producers. They're doing the photosynthesis. They're taking the carbon dioxide from the air and they're converting it into a form of a sugar that can be used by other living things. Now, on this graph that we've seen on a few slides here, we can see that it shows all of these different biomes of the world, and we're going to focus on some of these today. And we can see that on one axis of the graph, it goes from drier to wetter. And then the other axis is from hotter to colder. And you can see that there is a gradient. For example, if we look at the temperate deciduous forest, we can see that it occurs in places that are kind of in the middle, right? It's not too dry or too wet, and it's not too hot or too cold. Something like the tropical rainforest, on the other hand, is somewhere where it's quite wet and quite hot. So these environmental conditions influence the plants. Now, since we're focusing primarily on North America here, let's take a look at these biomes today. We've got tundra, we've got the northern coniferous forest, temperate deciduous forest, tropical rainforest, grassland, desert, and mountain forest. Most North American biomes, as I mentioned previously, are found on the other continents as well. And climate is the major influence that determines the composition of any biome. Let's start with tundra. Tundra occupies about 20% of the Earth's land surface. It's primarily found above the Arctic Circle, and it does appear treeless. There are plants there, but we don't tend to see any trees. Of course, with climate change and climate chaos throwing a wrench in things, this might start to change. Tundra usually has what's called permafrost, and it's permanently frozen soil. That depth can be anywhere from 10 centimeters to 1 meter below the surface. And therefore, we only have liquid water at or near the surface available for plants. Because for plants, frozen water isn't available. It's essentially a drought. Precipitation averages less than 25 centimeters annually because it's all frozen. Short growing seasons are very common in the tundra because it's frozen most of the year. So only about 2 to 3 months do we have a short summer where Arctic plants can reproduce. The temperatures vary widely, but they can get hot in the summer, up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It is a very fragile ecosystem. Here we can see a beautiful picture of the Alaskan tundra in the summer. Next up is the biome called taiga, also called the northern conifer or boreal forest. It's dominated by evergreen trees such as spruce, fir, and pine, and these are all conifer trees that are adapted to cold temperatures and sometimes even permafrost. In the northern conifer forest, we also see perennials, some shrubs, and a few annual species. The northern conifer forest land is dotted with many lakes, ponds, and marshes, often the result of glaciers that receded over time. And they're famous for having very long, severe winters. So organisms that live here and the plants that live here have to have adaptations that allow them to survive these extreme conditions. The temperatures can get to over 80 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. Of course, it's freezing cold in the winter. And the annual precipitation is pretty good. In the summer, they can get anywhere from 25 to 100 centimeters of rain. And here's a beautiful picture of taiga in Alaska, where we can see all of these different trees, big swaths of evergreen trees like spruce, fir, and pine. Next up is temperate deciduous forest. These forests are going to be dominated by deciduous broadleaved species. Now, remember that deciduous means that the trees drop their leaves every year. Usually they drop them in the autumn or fall months, like October, November, and then they go dormant during the winter, and then in the spring, they produce new leaves. In a temperate deciduous forest, we tend to have an annual precipitation of 50 to 165 centimeters. Again, mostly the rain falls in the summer. And that's when a lot of the reproduction occurs for these trees as well. The trees drop their leaves to survive that winter drought because remember, for a plant, winter is a drought because the water isn't available because it's frozen. There's a variety of plant associations throughout the United States for these temperate deciduous forests. In the Midwest, we see things like sugar maple and American basswood. In the Northeast, we see sugar maples, birch, oak, and American beech. In the West Central area, we see things like oaks and hickories. And in the southeastern states, we see oaks, hickories, pines, and bald cypress groves. Now, during the summer, a solid canopy of leaves keeps direct sunlight from reaching the forest floor. So therefore, the understory community must have adaptations that allows them to survive that shady summer. Many of the flowers in the understory therefore bloom in the spring before the tree leaves fully emerge, so that way they can get more light. Our next biome is the grasslands, and grasslands in North America are found in the interior of continental masses. We also have grasslands in the Central Valley of California. The annual precipitation is pretty good, about 25 to 100 centimeters of rain. And again, that usually falls in the summer, but also in the winter if it's a mild place where there's not freezing temperatures. The temperatures are highly variable from below zero frozen to very hot temperatures. And because of all of this good rain and this good temperature gradient, we have very fertile soils in these grasslands and prairies. For example, in the Midwest of the United States, the prairies support large herds of buffalo. In places like Iowa and Illinois, these grasses get huge. They can be up to 2 to 3 meters tall, and there's lots of different wildflower species present in these grassland biomes. Now, in places like California, we have a Mediterranean climate where we have a hot, dry summer and a cool, wet winter. So it doesn't usually freeze, but it's cool and damp if we're lucky. Of course, if it's a drought year, then we don't have very much rain. We can see very unique species in these Mediterranean grasslands. One example of a unique biome within a biome is a vernal pool. So in these grasslands, we'll have lots of water that pools up over the winter. And then as that water evaporates, we can see communities of flowers and plants that bloom in sequential order around that pool. Some of our rarest plant species are dependent on this vernal pool system. Next up is deserts, and we've got deserts throughout the world, but again, we're focusing on North America, and we've got beautiful deserts in the state of California. It's one of my favorite places to go camping. Deserts occur wherever precipitation is low. The definition of a desert isn't that it's hot, because deserts can be really hot or really cold. It's all about low moisture, low precipitation, and low humidity. Now, in order to survive these dry conditions of the desert, Some plants have to use modified photosynthesis, for example, CAM photosynthesis, in which the plants only open their stomata at night. During the day, they close them down to keep the water inside of the plant tissues. Other desert plant adaptations include thick cuticles on the leaves, water storage tissues in the stems and leaves, leathery leaves that are reduced in size or absent altogether, and if those leaves happen to be absent, then the stems have to be green to take over that photosynthesis. Here we can see a beautiful picture of the deserts of southwestern United States and Arizona with the iconic saguaro cactus. Next up is mountain and coastal forest. Coniferous forests of the Pacific Northwest, as well as portions of the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada of California, are going to be home to these mountain and coastal forests. Here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have coastal forests as well. Between San Mateo and Half Moon Bay, we have our coastal mountain range that supports lots of beautiful coastal forests and organisms like the world's tallest conifers, which are coastal redwoods. Mountain and coastal forests tend to have high annual rainfall, but sometimes it's not rain that provides that water, but rather it's fog. For example, in lower elevations on the coastal ranges in the Bay Area, we have fog up in those mountains that drips that water down to keep these giant conifers alive. Mountain forests tend to have conspicuous altitudinal zonation of their species. So as you work your way across that elevation gradient, you will see specific species growing with each other in these plant communities. Mountain and coastal forest systems tend to have relatively dry summers, and because of that we have frequent forest fires. Of course, with climate change and climate chaos occurring, these fires have intensified in recent years, burning millions of acres of forests each and every year. So this is a really big problem. However, many of these plants do have adaptations to survive fire, including things like thick bark, cones that do not release seeds until after a fire, which is the case for many pines, and seedlings that thrive in open areas after the fire. After a fire comes through, you might see those blackened, charred, woody stems of the trees, and then a couple years later you'll just see beautiful green and colorful flowers in the spring and summer. And our final biome is the tropical rainforest. These occupy about 5% of the Earth's surface, and it represents lots of the forested areas of our planet. It's really wet and it's really hot, and that's why we have a ton of species found in these tropical rainforests. They have no dry season because they have rain year-round for the most part, and the humidity is very high. This allows for the number of flora and fauna species to exceed those of all other biomes combined. Now, because it's a race for the light as these plants grow, forests tend to be dominated by broad-leaved evergreen trees with tall, unbranched trunks. They've got to really grow fast to outcompete each other before the canopy gets too dense. But there are lots of species that can survive in the shady, dark understory of the tropical rainforest. For example, Rafflesia is a holoparasite from Indonesia. It's completely parasitic on large tropical vine species that are growing in the forest. Tropical rainforests tend to have trees with shallow root systems with buttress roots, which provide stability for those trees. There is a dense multi-layered canopy, so we see a gradient of species that grow and survive in the canopy, including many things like woody vines called lianas, and epiphytic species, which are plants that grow on the sides of other plants. Epiphytes are not parasitic, but rather they have roots that just attach to the side of the tree. There's little accumulation of litter or humus in the understory because there's such a high turnover. There's so much bacteria and fungus that things break down and decompose immediately. And it's so wet that lots of the nutrients just flush out of the system or leach out of the system on a daily basis. So even though it's highly diverse with lots of plants, Surprisingly, the tropical rainforests have really bad soils. The future of our tropical rainforest biome is in peril. Tropical rainforests are being destroyed at a rate of 100 acres per minute, and this is due to large agricultural farms, hydroelectric plants, and mines. It's devastating. We really need our governments around the world to enforce the protection of these rainforests before it's too late. When a rainforest is cleared for development, the plant community can come back, but it takes a long time. An intact rainforest is called a climax community, but once we clear that climax community, it allows for earlier stages of succession to start to grow. The first plants that come in are annuals, and often these are considered weedy species. This plant growth doesn't utilize many soil nutrients, and unfortunately, lots of the nutrients get lost as runoff after we clear cut that system. Also, when we harvest the original plant biomass, for example, we clear cut the forest and then we haul those trees away for human use, most of those nutrients of the ecosystem are taken away. So these clearing of the rainforest practices can really lead to some long-term problems that we need to address in the years to come. All right, so in review, there are the major biomes of North America. Again, many of them are found elsewhere in the world, but we are focusing on those that are here in North America, including the tundra, the taiga, the temperate deciduous forest, the grassland, the desert, the mountain and coastal forest, and the tropical rainforest. Well, thank you very much for listening. Please message me with any questions. Thank you.